The world is shifting in ways most people don't yet see. As the first light breaks over Rio de Janeiro, a gathering is taking place that may one day be remembered as the moment the balance of power began to tilt. Leaders from across the global south are not here for ceremonial speeches or empty symbolism. They have come with a purpose, with intent, and with the knowledge that the order of the world is no longer fixed. This summit, this meeting of BRICS, is not just another diplomatic ritual. It is a signpost, a declaration that the future may not be decided in Washington, Brussels, or London, but in new capitals, with new voices, and on new terms. For years, the spotlight has followed the giants: China, India, Brazil, Russia. But just beyond the glare of headlines, something quieter and equally important is unfolding. Southeast Asia is making a calculated move. Not reckless, not noisy, but deliberate. Its governments are looking at the shifting landscape and seeing an opportunity that cannot be ignored. They are not aligning with BRICS out of loyalty, nor are they abandoning old partners out of hostility. They are doing so because strategy demands it. Because survival in the 21st century requires options. And because they recognize what others may have missed, that two opportunities buried within BRICS may hold the key to sovereignty, stability, and prosperity for decades to come. To understand the weight of this moment, we have to step back and look at BRICS not as it was imagined 20 years ago, but as it exists today. In its early years, BRICS, made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and later South Africa, was often dismissed as little more than a talking shop. A catchy acronym with lofty speeches but little substance. Western capitals viewed it as posturing, symbolic at best, irrelevant at worst. And for a time, they were right. The group had ambition but lacked leverage. It had scale but lacked coordination. But that era is gone. Since 2024, BRICS has transformed. It has expanded far beyond its original 5 members. Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates have joined, turning BRICS from a loose coalition into a 10-member force with both political and economic weight. Collectively, these nations now represent nearly 40% of global GDP when measured by purchasing power parity. That figure surpasses the G7, the grouping long considered the center of global leadership. The numbers alone tell a story of rising influence. But what matters even more is what this bloc represents: the emergence of a parallel structure to the Western-led order. A new table where rules, values, and strategies are not imposed but debated, rewritten, and redefined. And this is precisely where Southeast Asia enters the picture. No longer content to sit at the margins, the region is moving toward the heart of this new framework. Indonesia, the region's largest economy and a nation with growing influence, took the decisive step in January 2024 by formally joining BRICS. That single act shifted the equation. Suddenly, what had felt abstract became real. The region could no longer ignore that the world's economic and political map was being redrawn. Following Indonesia's move, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam began to deepen their engagement with the bloc. They are not full members, at least not yet, but they are active participants, attending forums, exploring financial mechanisms, and carefully studying the alternatives BRICS has to offer. This is not random drift. It is a calculated alignment. A quiet tide drawing Southeast Asia closer to a new center of gravity. Why now? Why this shift? Why this bloc? Because BRICS has matured into something beyond rhetoric. It has built institutions with teeth, mechanisms with credibility, and tools that matter for emerging economies. And 2 of these tools are drawing Southeast Asia closer than ever. The first is the new development bank, the BRICS Bank. Unlike Western financial institutions that often wrap assistance in conditions, political strings, or austerity demands, this bank is designed differently. It is not a theory on paper. It is a fully functioning institution funding real projects across the developing world. Infrastructure, renewable energy, connectivity, growth. For countries like Malaysia and Thailand, this bank is more than a source of finance. It is a symbol of choice. It is proof that development does not have to come at the price of dependence. It allows them to borrow, build, and expand without being cornered into debt traps or forced into the agendas of foreign patrons. In a world where too often development has been synonymous with surrender, the space to choose one's partners is not a luxury, it is power. The second pillar is quieter but no less important, the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, or CRA. This is the bloc's financial safety net. In moments of volatility, when currencies crash, when capital flees, when sudden shocks hit economies, member states can tap into this reserve. And unlike other institutions that demand austerity, privatization, or political concessions, the CRA offers support without stripping nations of their sovereignty. It is insurance, a collective shield. In a century that promises more turbulence than stability, this is not just useful, it is essential. It gives countries the confidence that when storms come, they will not face them alone, nor at the cost of their independence. And so the logic for Southeast Asia becomes clear. This is not about choosing China over America. It is not about turning away from the West or falling into anyone's orbit. It is about rejecting the binary altogether. About forging a third path, a path defined by multipolarity, by cooperation, and by balance. It is about building a global order where power is not dictated from above, but shared among many. This is the deeper story unfolding beneath the surface of the BRICS summit. Not just a gathering of leaders, not just speeches and ceremonies, but a quiet recalibration of power, one that stretches from Rio de Janeiro to Jakarta, from Brasilia to Bangkok, and from Moscow to Kuala Lumpur. The Global South is no longer waiting for permission. It is writing its own script. And Southeast Asia, once an observer, is now stepping onto the stage. Where nations stand shoulder to shoulder as equals rather than pawns in someone else's game, the vision carries undeniable appeal, especially in Southeast Asia. This is a region that for half a century has perfected the art of walking the tightrope between rival powers. It has leaned on American military protection, even as it has embraced China's vast markets. It has lived in balance, careful, deliberate, pragmatic. But balance is becoming harder to preserve. The world is no longer patient with neutrality. Choices are being demanded. Sides are being drawn. And into that pressure steps BRICS, offering not a single road, but multiple exits, flexibility, breathing space, and the possibility of charting a different course. That possibility is not lost on the established powers. In Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo, unease is spreading. Sometimes it's whispered in backrooms, other times it's stated openly. BRICS is not just another forum, it is a direct challenge to the hierarchy that has long defined the global system. It represents a shift in gravity, a redistribution of leverage. But where some see disruption, much of the Global South sees correction. For Southeast Asia, in particular, this is less about defiance than about fairness, less about revolution than overdue balancing. For decades, the system worked for the few at the top. Now the many are asking for their share of agency. And so, Southeast Asian leaders don't approach this as a battle of ideology, but as a matter of survival and strategy. The future they prepare for will not be governed by yesterday's rules. It requires new alignments, born not from coercion but cooperation, not from dominance but mutual gain. BRICS, once dismissed as just a loose coalition, is emerging as a stage where emerging powers are writing their own narrative. And Southeast Asia, long ignored, often underestimated, is no longer content to remain in the background. It is picking up the pen, ready to script its own future. This is not a pivot away, it is a recalibration forward. The future cannot be boxed into East or West anymore. This moment stretches beyond the familiar routines of diplomacy. It is about power projection, about strengthening alliances that give small and mid-sized states leverage in a world that is shifting beneath their feet. At its heart, this is about freedom of choice, about placing more voices at the table and creating opportunities for nations to shape outcomes on their own terms. For Vietnam, for the Philippines, for others caught between the two great powers, the worst outcome would be being forced into a binary decision, Washington or Beijing. With tensions building, especially around flashpoints like Taiwan, governments are desperate to preserve maneuverability, to keep doors open, not closed. But nothing about this realignment is simple. Some states are cautiously intrigued by BRICS. Others hesitate, wary and suspicious. And often that wariness leads back to the unavoidable elephant in the room, China. As a founding and most influential member of BRICS, Beijing wields enormous weight inside the bloc. That is precisely what unsettles many in Southeast Asia. Nations like the Philippines, aligned closely with Washington, already carry deep mistrust toward Beijing's intentions. The South China Sea disputes make this distrust visceral. Both Vietnam and the Philippines clash with China there, and the idea of handing Beijing yet another platform to amplify its voice triggers alarm. For them, BRICS can sometimes look less like a global opportunity and more like a Chinese megaphone. Overlaying this is ASEAN, the cornerstone of Southeast Asian diplomacy. For decades, ASEAN has been built on three pillars: unity, neutrality, centrality. But those principles come under strain when individual members start forging their own separate channels with BRICS. Malaysia, for example, has already done so, inviting Vladimir Putin and other BRICS leaders to the 2025 ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur. That bold move, as ASEAN chair, could fracture the bloc. Some see it as diplomatic daring, others view it as reckless, even dangerous. US-friendly nations like the Philippines are unlikely to accept Russia's presence lightly, especially amid ongoing global divisions. The unity of ASEAN itself hangs in the balance. Above all of this looms the United States, still powerful, still unpredictable, and often blunt. Donald Trump, still a commanding figure in American politics, has made no secret of his disdain for BRICS. He has already threatened crushing tariffs, 100% in some cases, against BRICS countries should they attempt to undermine the dollar's supremacy or launch a common currency. In his first term, Trump placed tariffs of up to 49% on some ASEAN states. Those same nations are now cautiously flirting with BRICS. The lesson is clear. Moving closer to the bloc risks provoking Washington's anger, particularly under another Trump administration where retaliation is swift, sharp, and unrelenting. That is why the balancing act for ASEAN has never been more delicate. For years, it managed to dance carefully between Beijing and Washington, never fully alienating either. But as BRICS expands and the global South begins to assert itself, neutrality is harder and harder to defend. Full ASEAN membership in BRICS is unlikely. Divisions in political systems, economies, and national strategies make a unified leap implausible. The bloc still treasures its identity as non-aligned. Yet look closer at the individual level and a different story emerges. Country by country, governments are testing the waters, weighing the benefits of engagement. Not as rebellion, not as rejection of the West, but as insurance, as a hedge, as protection for sovereignty in a world where smaller states are all too often treated as collateral in great power rivalries. This is not about making a choice between superpowers. It is about reclaiming independence of action. It is about refusing to be drafted into someone else's rivalry. It is about asserting sovereignty rather than accepting subordination. And as the BRICS summit begins in Rio, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. The global South is not waiting for permission. Southeast Asia is no longer on the sidelines. It is stepping onto the field, ready to compete, ready to shape outcomes on its own terms. The South is not silent anymore. The South is rising.